Good morning. It's truly good to see each and every one of you. It's especially good to have you here today. If you're visiting with us, we're greatly honored that you've chosen to be here with us today, and we hope and pray that you benefit from this service as well as all of us can benefit from this service and the services that will follow. It's a wonderful blessing to be able to come and praise God and to worship Him and to start our week by doing that. And we are truly blessed individuals. Do instructions matter? In some cases, we might be inclined to say no. I know the knock on us men, and it is mostly true, is that when we buy a new piece of equipment that comes with instructions, we're not so inclined to even open up the plastic that contains those instructions before we at least give it the old college try ourselves. And then almost always in my case, and don't you say I'm doing it wrong, I don't know what I'm doing because you'd be right, and I don't want to hear that, but I always end up opening those instructions and trying to figure out where did I miss the step? What should I be putting in here that I don't know, and how am I supposed to do this? Now, you might be very proficient and don't need instructions for that. Nothing wrong with not opening that instruction manual if you know what you're doing. Ladies, you might say, well, I watched this show on TV, or I've seen this recipe on Facebook or whatever internet site that I'm on, and I think I can make it without downloading the recipe. And you might give it a try. And perhaps you're very skilled in the kitchen and you're able to do that. But in many cases, what will happen with that is the furniture that you've tried to make without the instructions more than likely breaks due to poor manufacturing and putting together by you or me. Or in other cases, perhaps you didn't do the right recipe. And so the meal that you made, the dish that you cooked, doesn't taste that great. Instructions do matter. There might be something that you can do that you've done so often that you don't need the instruction manual anymore. You don't need to have the guidance anymore because you've done it so often, but instructions matter. I want you to know why they matter from a worldly perspective first. When you think about evidence being considered in a court case, do you know how many instructions have to be followed in order for evidence to be presented in a court case and for it to be admissible in court? Consider the following information for me, if you will. Evidence generally falls under 4 different categories. There is real evidence, which is an actual object that was directly involved in the event or the case, such as a weapon to murder somebody, a hammer, a hockey stick they might find that has blood on it. That would be a real piece of evidence that would be collected. There is then demonstrative evidence, an illustration of evidence, something like a map of the crime scene. Well, here is the map, and in this room we entered, here was where the body was found, here are the other items we found around the body. That's demonstrative evidence. Then you have documentary evidence, or documentary evidence, also a type of real evidence. It describes letters, contracts, newspapers, anything that contains human language. Well, here's a threatening email we found from this person saying, I'm going to kill you. That's evidence. We think this means that this person had a motive to kill our client, the victim. Therefore, we're going to submit this as evidence. Then you have testimonial or anecdotal evidence. This is, of course, verbal or written evidence, such as a written statement stating, I was here such and such on this night, and I did such and such. Almost all victims and suspects and witnesses have to do this. You've got the victim pretty much already figured out because they're already either having been robbed or sadly maybe even deceased. But any suspect has to give a verbal testimony of where they were, what they did, and that is then considered to be evidence. But in order for evidence to be submitted into court, they need to follow the rules of admissibility. They've got to be admissible. And here are those rules. There's relevance. Something has to prove or disprove a fact of the crime. It doesn't necessarily prove anyone's guilt or innocence. It simply is a broad term that describes any piece of evidence related to the case. For instance, a tool that is stained with a suspect's blood might be relevant, for example, but so is the person who sold the tool to the suspect. Then you have something to consider with testimony from a toddler is probably not going to be very strong in court because the toddler doesn't really know what happened. And so you won't want to submit a toddler as testimony. That will get thrown out. These are rules that you must follow. There's another one called materiality. On the other hand, needs to be able to prove an essential fact of the case. For example, if a lawyer attempts to prove that the drapes in the room of a murder scene were blue, chances are a judge will deem such evidence immaterial. The room itself may be relevant to the case, but it's likely that the color of the drapes don't have anything to do with the murder. Therefore, you don't have to have that. It won't be submitted as evidence. And then competence. Finally, competent evidence is an object or testimony proven to be reliable, such as matching fingerprints, results of a DNA test, or an expert on footwear impressions. An expert giving an opinion that isn't generally accepted in his field, on the other hand, is neither competent nor admissible. You notice in these huge trials, they look for experts. And this is why. They need to know what they're talking about. Otherwise, their whole testimony isn't admissible, isn't competent, can't be trusted. All of these amongst an endless amount of inconsistency and several exceptions, but one of the most important rules of admissible evidence is the hearsay rule. This rule prohibits secondhand testimony or evidence like he said, she said in a trial to be allowed. If an eyewitness to an accident tells his friends the details of the event, the eyewitness's friend would be considered inadmissible. He didn't see the accident, he merely heard about the accident. Therefore, his testimony would be thrown out. Now, if you're as confused as I was when I read all of this, I understand. But there are so many things that have to be followed for these evidential items and matters to be admissed and then absolutely followed. Here's something that's interesting. You and I all know of a trial that went off the rails because of mishandling of evidence, right? We all can think of a trial that might come to our mind of people who they got off because someone didn't do the right form of testing, and so the evidence was inadmissible. They didn't go through the proper channels and get a warrant first, therefore they have no right to have what they have. And so it gets thrown out. And though it was the most damning piece of evidence against their best suspect. Or perhaps you know of someone, you might have read of people who they're thrown in prison because evidence suggests that they're the one that did it, and yet the evidence is wrong. Both have been true. Both have happened. And why did they happen? But because someone didn't follow instructions. But because somebody didn't take the time to do it by the book. I'm watching a current crime show right now, and they entered the premises without knowing that they didn't have permission to enter into the premises. And so once that was found out, the lead detective said, "We're leaving." And the other guy said, we've got a body right here. And he said, "We're getting a warrant. We're doing this by the book. I'm not having this case fall apart in court." That, while it would be so tempting to process the scene, to look for all the clues, was the right decision. Because instead of getting everything and not having a warrant, now they were going to come back with the warrant and be able to do it by the book. Instructions matter, and I want us to look in Genesis 6 and find out why they matter. In the first place, we notice a corrupt earth. The Bible tells me of Noah's genealogy in Genesis 6, verses 9 and 10, that Noah was a just man. perfect in his generations. He walked with God. And he begat 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. But then it tells me of this corruption of the earth prior to that. Now, everything up until Genesis 3 we know was good. And everything past Genesis 3 has not been so good. You have the fall of man in Genesis 3. You have the fall of the family, in some senses you could say, by brother and brother in Genesis 4, when Cain took his own brother's life, Abel, all over a sacrifice. Though I agree, I don't think that was the first and only time Cain was slighted in favor of his brother, or that Abel was treated better than Cain because he did something better than him. I know how jealousy works. It's not something that just comes on you very quickly. In many cases, especially with brothers and siblings, it builds. We had last week Genesis 5, which talks about all of these people who lived and died. Now we get to Genesis 6, and we know that God is looking down on the earth, and he knows when corruption starts. God clearly can see this earth and know who and what is corrupted. Because he looks down, he sees men multiplying on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, and that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. The Bible doesn't say that they considered what God would have them to do. It's not surprising that when man does what he thinks is right, he becomes corrupted. It's not surprising when man starts to do things his own way that he becomes corrupted. But not only does God know when corruption starts, he begins to look down on the earth. He sees this great wickedness, and that every thought and intent of man's heart was only evil continually. God has the ability to see your heart, to see my heart. I don't have that power. Sometimes with certain things and certain situations, I wish I could look into someone's heart and see if they were legitimate or not, if they really had my best interests at heart. God can do that, and he notices that all of these people are evil now. And the Lord was sorry that he made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. Therefore, God made a mistake, right? God messed up when he made man, and now he's got to repent. Who can God turn and pray to? Himself? It is not that God made a mistake. It is simply that his view has changed from Genesis 1 and 2. In Genesis 1 and 2, when everything was created, including mankind, God said that it was good, very good. And yet now, he notices that they're doing things contrary to his will. They're going against what he taught them, going against what he gave them. And so his view has changed, and it's grieving his heart. You know, we change our minds too often. We will go to a restaurant perhaps, and we'll really, really like a certain dish, and we'll eat it almost every time we go there. And we'll go there, and for all of a sudden, some reason, we take a bite of what is our favorite meal, and it just doesn't taste as good to us. And so you might chalk it up to, well, it's just a fluke. You know, next time I come back, I'll get it again. You come back again, and it still doesn't taste right. And you begin to think, have my taste buds changed, and I don't really like this as much as I used to? We can make decisions like that, where we say we liked something, and we don't like it anymore. We do it with people too. Are there people in your lives that you once loved, held close, absolutely would have done anything for, and now you barely speak because of what they've done to you or to your family? Your view's changed. Is that wrong on your part? Who made the mistake? Now, if it's you, sure, you need to correct it. But in the case of someone wronging you and mankind wronging God, you can see very clearly it wasn't God's fault. Mankind moved. God didn't need to repent. We are told of consequences of corruption in Genesis 6 and verse 7, and that is that God plans to destroy the earth. We can never forget that actions have consequences. From the basic idea of dropping a pin to the most severe idea and act of breaking God's law, actions have consequences. If I were to take my pen that's in my shirt pocket and I were to drop it, it's not going to stay floating in midair. And if it did, you would think he must have it attached to some type of string. It's going to fall. If I break God's law, what is the consequence of that? Destruction. Destruction. And sometimes the consequences for what we do are very severe, and that is what we find in Genesis 6 through 8, which foretells and does tell the entire account of the flood. Consequences are very severe. Could it be said that they were not deserving of what was about to happen to them? Can anybody make the case for these wicked people that they don't deserve punishment? No. God blessed man. Man left God. God therefore punishes man. It is a very simple equation. We have complicated it over the years, and I'll get into that in the final point of this lesson, but it is a very simple equation. God blesses man. If man leaves God, God will punish man. But then we find Noah, who has this grace in the eyes of God. We're told Noah found grace, and that tells us that his life was different, that he was someone who stood out during a time of great wickedness as someone who broke the mold. He wasn't normal. And according to 2 Peter 2 and verse 5, God had told us earlier in this chapter of Genesis 6 that man's days would be 120 years. That's how many years prior before the flood would come. According to 2 Peter 2:5, we're told Noah was a preacher of righteousness. The implication then is that while the ark was being built, Noah was pleading with people to get their lives right, and they could have passage on the ark. The Memphis School of Preaching takes a restoration trip every other year for its faculty and students that want to go, and the students are required to go. They added an attraction, and I was so upset because they added it after I graduated. They go to the Ark now, the Creation Museum. We went to the Creation Museum, but the Ark was not yet completely finished and able to be put on our docket. Therefore, we couldn't go. My mom was telling me, having seen the Ark, Megan and I need to take a trip to see it at some point. It's massive, and there is more than enough room for more people on there. And God intended for there to be more people on there if they would have changed. And Noah preached for 120 years, hoping that they would change. But because Noah found grace, God's going to tell him how to save not just him, but the grace of Noah is extended to his family. I'm not told that Noah's family found grace in the eyes of the Lord. I am told that Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. And that God then allowed Noah's family to have safe passage from the flood. A righteous father makes a difference. Don't ever tell someone that it doesn't. A righteous father makes a difference. Noah's going to build an ark. And we find these instructions for building the ark in verses 13 through 21. God informs Noah of his plan. I'm going to destroy the earth. It's going to be filled with violence, so I'm going to destroy everything in here. So I want to give you some instructions for building the ark. I want you to notice all the instructions that are given and all of the things that are laid out for Noah. God gave Noah instructions for the type of wood to use, the length of the ark, for the rooms and how big and how wide and what they needed to look like. He gave him instructions for how many windows should the ark have. What about the decks? What about the passengers of the ark? He gave him instructions for the storage of the ark. God covered everything. Every single facet that needed to be covered about this ark, He made sure to cover with Noah. Have you ever gotten a piece of furniture from a Target or a Walmart and you open it up and you get out the instruction manual and it says grab screw CA, and you look and there is no screw CA because somehow the manufacturer forgot to put one in? You know how maddening that is? Because almost always that little screw is not a normal screw you can just go down and buy. It's one of those special screws that is only made for that particular type of equipment. So then you got to call and you've got to wait for them to send you the part. By the time the part finally gets there, you've forgotten about the piece. It's probably out in the garage, and so you never put the thing together. I've done that. I've been there. It's frustrating. God didn't leave anything out. There was nothing that God told Noah that when Noah got to it, he thought, okay, go for wood. Where will I find that? How am I going to set it with pitch and do all of that? How am I going to find that? Everything God told Noah to do, Noah could easily access and use to build. Let me make this quick point. Everything God expects for you and me to do, He gave you easy access to do. Everything. There is not a piece of instruction that God has laid out for us that a man could say, I don't know how to find it. He might need someone to help him look for it, but it's there. God didn't leave anything out. He didn't do it for Noah, and He won't do it for you or for me. These were the instructions that were given for building the ark. So were they important? Do instructions really matter? They matter to Noah. Because in Genesis 6 and verse 22, thus Noah did. According to all that God commanded him, so he did. Wait a minute. You mean to tell me that he did everything the way God told him to do? Yes. Every last bit of instruction was followed. Not just what was agreed with, not just what he felt he could manage, he did it all. Now, I know that there have been adaptations of the ark in the movie theaters and whatnot. I have yet to find one that I have truly enjoyed and thought was 100% factual, but I could say that about any biblical movie. It's hard. Hollywood likes to Hollywood and try to make things more dramatic at times than they really were. One particular adaptation we watched of Noah and the ark, I believe John Voight was one of the actors in that movie, and he woke up one morning and came out and the ark was finished. And he says, Lord, you finished it. And God says, yes, I did. But the Bible tells me thus Noah did. According to all of God's instruction, Noah built the ark. Had Noah not picked up a hammer, would God have built that ark for him? Who would have drowned with everyone else? Noah. Brethren, God promised Noah only one thing. Build that boat, it will float. That's it. That's all God promised Noah. If you build this, you will have salvation. God promises us one thing. Be baptized, you will be saved. Be baptized, you will be saved. If I never step into the water, how can I access that salvation? If Noah never picked up a hammer, never went out to get gopher wood, he would have died just like the rest of them, and he would have been just as wicked as the rest of them. Because a wicked man doesn't do what God tells him to do. Noah instead did everything according to the plan. Noah thought instructions mattered. Now, some might say, that's not fair. Why didn't God do it this way? And what kind of a loving God would do this? let me spin this question, the last one, around. What kind of a creation spits in the face of its Creator? You know, that's really the question we need to ask instead of asking what kind of a loving God would punish His people. What kind of a people would hate their Creator with no cause? The relationship between a mother and father and between God and His children are very similar. A mother and father make difficult decisions and tell their children no. And tell their children, you can't do that. I'm not allowing you to do that. No, sir. No, ma'am. Get away from that. And in the child's mind, the only thing many times running through their head is, Mama and Daddy don't care about me. Mama and Daddy don't want me to have fun. They don't want me to enjoy life. They don't want me to have the best things in life, and they're holding me back. But as you get older, and young people, I'm promising you this, you get older and you realize they did know what they were doing. They did care. They did understand. They were looking out for my best interests. And I could have listened better. But as Christians, sometimes we will read in the Bible and God will tell us, no, I don't want you doing such and such. And we will say, that's not fair. Why couldn't you have done it this way? And what kind of a loving God is going to hold back His people? What kind of a loving people will deny their God the right to rule in their home? My dad used to say all of the time, when you can make a universe, you can govern it however you see fit. But until then, this household will bow to the one who can. Very simple statement, but it challenges any atheist. It challenges any evolutionist. It challenges anybody who wants to say that God can't do things the way that He wants to do them, and yet will turn around and say a home run is only worth one unless you have more than one person on base. Why? Well, because that's the way the rules are written. I don't like it. But the rules say, explain to me why that matters. Because people sat down, they came up with these rules, and they're going to be followed. No. Doesn't matter. When I step up to the plate to hit that ball, if I knock it out of the park and I'm the only one there, I'm the only one getting to score. No matter what I think, no matter what I want. Don't you think baseball players, when they hit the final shot of the game, and maybe it's a home run, but the very next play it was an out, don't you think they wish that run counted for more? Because the game's over now. Yeah, they do, but they can't change it. The rules are the rules. And they were set up by people who had more authority and have more authority than the players and than the coaches and than any of the league has. And they're not just going to change it because somebody decides that my home run was so great it's worth 2 or 3. And this book won't change simply because someone decides, I don't like rules 2 and 3. I'm going to scratch them out. They don't apply to me anymore. God's not going to say, well, you got me. There's nothing I can do. I want you to really ask yourselves, when you go back through the first 5 chapters and chapter 6 of Genesis, you're looking through it, ask yourself this question. Look at all God did for His creation, all that He blessed them with, and then look at all of man's failures, and then ask yourself, is what God is doing really unjustified? A simple study of the book of Amos would even answer that question for you, because in Amos, God would say in multiple cases, I tried this, I tried that, you've not returned to me. I tried everything that I possibly could, you have finally forced my hand, captivity is coming. I've done everything else I can do. God is justified in what He is about to do in the next 2 chapters after this. He has the absolute right. Mamas used to say, and maybe still do, I brought you into this world, I can take you out of this world. God brought these men and women into this world, and He has every right to take them out of it for not living the way that they ought to live. Imagine how God must feel when we tell God how He should handle sin. Overlook it. Don't judge me for it. Don't hold me accountable for it. And God's simply sitting there saying, you've never created a universe. You don't know what you're talking about. I can't overlook it. It's not right. The solution to all of life is to follow instructions. It's so simple. Follow the instructions. God's not messed up. God's not ever going to lead you down a path without knowing that you can properly navigate it. That doesn't mean the path won't be difficult, but it means you'll be able to properly navigate it. You know, the flood is coming. It's on the way in this book. We're getting so close to it. And I want you to remember something. It rained on everybody. And that flood affected everybody. Not one person on the earth would be able to say that they did not experience the flood. But only 8 could say that they were saved from it. No man has ever failed at life when following God's instruction manual. Life is tough. It's hard. It rains on everybody. But only those who follow the instruction manual will be able to say that we're saved from it. That it doesn't matter what happens to us. That we can make it through. That we can be better. That we can do more. That we can serve God. Oh, you lost your life. You lost everything that you held dear to you, and your whole life seems worthless now. No, it's not. I've mentioned this song before, but I think it's appropriate as we close out with it. You might have heard the Craig Morgan song, This Ain't Nothing. Pardon my grammar if you are an English teacher. That's the title of the song, okay? But in that song, it details the account of an old man who is being interviewed by a reporter after a devastating twister has come through and destroyed his whole house. And when the reporter says, what are you going to do now? It's taken everything that you love. What are you going to do? And the song says that the old man looks at him and says, this ain't nothing. I lost my dad when I was 8 years old. I lost my baby brother, my best friend, and my left hand in Vietnam. I've lost a lot more than just a house. And then he says, chief of all of that, I lost my loving wife. And I was there when she died. So this ain't nothing. I've been through more than a house being lost. And he says, I love the song, the lyric in the song. I learned at an early age, there's things that matter, there's things that don't. And if you and I can look at the instruction manual and realize there's things that matter and there's things that don't, we will make it through this life no matter what happens, no matter how much rain comes down upon us, no matter how many heartaches and tragedies we'll face and go through. It ain't nothing because of the God that we serve. And if you want to serve that God, you will make the greatest decision in your life. If you're already serving Him, wonderful. So blessed and proud of you. But perhaps you need to become a child of God this morning. You can do that by hearing, believing, repenting, confessing, and being baptized. Maybe you have done all of that, but you've wandered away from the instruction manual. I hope you know instructions really matter and that you're ready to get back on track, to move forward again with God, to rise up and build. And you can do that right now. Whatever need you have, as together we stand and sing. Won't you please?